They had never seen anything like it, a massive Pacific Giant Octopus. One of the most intelligent creatures in the ocean was trapped in the deepest underwater cave system off the coast of California. A marine biologist dove down to help. But what left everyone speechless wasn't just the creature they found, it was what the octopus did next. Because in that moment, 200 feet beneath the surface, in the crushing darkness of an unexplored cavern, instinct turned into something else, something we don't often talk about in the depths. Trust, recognition, and a kind of understanding that doesn't need words. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, hit like, and turn on notifications, because the story you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about the intelligence and emotions of sea creatures. The waters off Monterey Bay were unusually calm that morning. Late spring had brought perfect diving conditions with visibility extending over 100 feet. Through the crystal-clear Pacific waters, the kelp forests swayed gently in the current, creating underwater cathedrals of green and gold. Marine biologist Dr. Sarah Chen had been exploring the underwater cave systems since dawn, her team searching for new species that might be hiding in the unexplored depths of the continental shelf. She was checking her oxygen gauge and adjusting her underwater camera equipment when her dive partner's voice crackled through the underwater communication system. Strange movements deep in the cathedral cave system, possible large marine animal trapped or injured, could be a elephant seal, or something much, much bigger. The cathedral caves were legendary among local divers, a massive underwater cavern system that extended deep into the rocky coastline, with chambers large enough to hold entire buildings and passages that disappeared into absolute darkness. Even experienced technical divers rarely ventured into the deepest sections, where crushing pressure and complete absence of natural light created conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. 20 minutes later, Sarah's fins kicked through the narrow entrance of the cave system, her powerful underwater lights cutting through the darkness like silver knives, illuminating walls covered in colorful anemones and clusters of mussels that had never seen sunlight. And what she saw in the main chamber made her heart race and her breathing spike. There, wedged between two massive granite boulders, each the size of a small car, was the largest octopus she had ever encountered. In 15 years of marine research, its body easily 8 feet across, its 8 massive tentacles stretching nearly 20 feet into the shadowy recesses of the cave, each arm thick as a telephone pole and covered in hundreds of powerful suction cups. But it wasn't just resting in the cave, it was trapped, horribly, completely trapped. Commercial fishing nets, the heavy-duty kind used by deep-sea trawlers, had somehow become tangled around the creature's massive body. Thick synthetic rope, stronger than steel cable, had wrapped around several tentacles like cruel medieval chains, anchoring the magnificent creature to the rocky ceiling. Above, the octopus had been struggling for hours, maybe days. Its skin flushed deep crimson, the unmistakable color of extreme stress, exhaustion, and slowly mounting panic. Sarah's heart broke as she saw the extent of the entanglement. The netting had cut deep into the octopus's soft tissue, creating wounds that bled steadily into the surrounding water. Several tentacle tips had turned pale, indicating circulation had been cut off for dangerously long periods. The creature's breathing was labored, its large, intelligent eyes dulled with pain and what looked unmistakably like despair. Sarah spoke into her underwater radio, her voice tight with emotion. Incredible discovery. Giant Pacific octopus severely trapped in abandoned commercial fishing gear approximately 200 feet down in Cathedral Cave system. Creature appears to be in critical condition, extensive injuries, visible circulation, compromised in multiple limbs, immediate rescue required. The response crackled back through the water, bringing backup team. Now, Sarah, but be extremely careful. Those animals are incredibly strong and completely unpredictable when cornered or injured. One swipe from those tentacles could kill you instantly. But as Sarah approached slowly, her dive lights fully illuminating the trapped giant, something extraordinary began to happen, something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about cephalopod behavior and intelligence. The octopus stopped thrashing against its bonds. Its massive body went still, and its skin began to change. Not to the mottled brown of defensive camouflage or the aggressive bright red of territorial display, but to something else entirely, something Sarah had never seen in any textbook or research paper. Waves of deep blue and shimmering silver began to ripple across the creature's body in complex patterns that seemed almost like Morse code, flashing in sequences that felt deliberate Purposeful and unmistakably communicative, the patterns weren't random stress responses, they were organized, structured like language. Sarah felt her breath catch in her diving mask, causing her regulator to fog slightly. The creature wasn't just displaying panic colors, it was trying to communicate with her, trying to tell her something important in a language of light and color that transcended species barriers. Moving with deliberate slowness, Sarah approached the trapped octopus, keeping her movements calm and non-threatening. She could see profound intelligence in its large, dark eyes, something that defied everything marine biology textbooks taught about primitive cephalopod behavior. The creature was watching her every movement, not with the simple awareness of a cornered animal fighting for survival, but with what could only be described as hope, recognition, and perhaps even trust. Carefully, Sarah pulled out her razor-sharp diving knife designed specifically for cutting through fishing line and nets, and began working on the thickest section of synthetic netting wrapped around the octopus's primary feeding tentacle. The material was incredibly tough, requiring significant pressure to cut through, but the creature remained perfectly still, as if it understood that sudden movement might cause the blade to slip, might turn a rescue attempt into accidental injury. As she worked methodically through the tough, synthetic fibers, sawing back and forth with careful precision, one of the octopus's free tentacles, the only arm not completely entangled in the netting, reached toward her, not aggressively or defensively, but with the gentle curiosity of an intelligent being extending friendship to a potential ally. The massive tentacle touched her diving suit with the lightest pressure possible, running along her arm, with delicate precision that sent shivers of amazement through Sarah's entire body. Each suction cup along the tentacle's length made contact with her suit, creating dozens of tiny points of connection. She was experiencing something that no marine biologist had ever documented in scientific literature: direct cooperative contact with a wild giant Pacific octopus. Sarah whispered into her radio, her voice filled with wonder. "This is beyond anything in the research literature. The octopus is not only allowing me to approach and help, it's actively participating in its own rescue, attempting to communicate and making physical contact in a completely non-aggressive manner." When her dive partner, Dr. James Murphy, arrived 15 minutes later, carrying additional cutting tools, emergency air supplies, and underwater video equipment, he found a scene that challenged 40 years of marine biology research and his own understanding of cephalopod cognitive abilities. The octopus had somehow managed to untangle two of its smaller secondary tentacles during the time Sarah had been working, and was now using them to hold sections of netting away from its body, creating better angles for Sarah to access the most tightly wrapped areas and cut through the remaining entanglement more efficiently. James approached with his professional underwater camera system, rolling documenting every moment of the unprecedented interaction for scientific analysis. In 25 years of studying cephalopods around the world from the Pacific Northwest to the Mediterranean Sea, he spoke through the communication system. "I have never witnessed cooperative behavior like this between human and cephalopod. This appears to be complex problem-solving and interspecies communication." As the rescue team expanded to include two more marine biologists, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in marine animal cognition, and Tom Bradley, a technical diving expert with decades of underwater rescue experience, the octopus, whom they began calling Atlas, continued to display remarkable intelligence, emotional awareness, and what could only be interpreted as gratitude. When the divers needed to reposition themselves to access different sections of tangled netting, Atlas would shift its massive body to accommodate them, moving its bulk carefully to avoid knocking into the humans or disturbing their delicate cutting work when they struggled with particularly thick sections of commercial-grade rope. Atlas would use its free tentacles to pull the material taut, creating tension that made it much easier to cut through efficiently. Even more remarkably, Atlas began displaying what the research team could only interpret as encouragement and emotional support. When the divers made visible progress, cutting through sections of the net, the octopus's skin would flash brilliant patterns of blue and gold that seemed to pulse with joy or relief when they encountered especially difficult sections, where the netting had twisted into impossible knots. Atlas would display calmer, more soothing colors, almost as if offering reassurance that the work would eventually succeed. Dr. Murphy documented the entire 2-hour interaction with multiple underwater cameras, capturing behavior that would later be studied by marine biologists, cognitive researchers, and animal psychologists around the world. The octopus was not simply enduring a rescue operation, it was participating in a complex cooperative effort with an alien species, demonstrating problem-solving skills, emotional intelligence, and communication abilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness in non-human life forms. The commercial fishing netting had been wrapped around Atlas for at least 3 days, based on the condition of the synthetic fibers, which showed signs of prolonged stress and the obvious exhaustion visible in the creature's movements and coloration. But despite the extended ordeal, despite what must have been tremendous physical pain and psychological trauma, Atlas remained patient, gentle, and cooperative throughout the entire rescue operation. As they worked, Sarah noticed details that made her hands shake with emotion behind her diving mask. Atlas had sustained significant injuries from the netting, deep lacerations where the rope had rubbed against soft tissue areas where circulation had been completely cut off for too long, leaving tentacle tips pale and possibly suffering from tissue death. Several suction cups had been damaged by the constant pressure of the synthetic rope, and there were signs of internal injuries from the constriction around the creature's main body. But even in obvious pain, even facing potential permanent disability and possible death, Atlas continued to help the rescue team. Never once did the giant octopus show aggression toward the humans who were working to save its life. Never once did it use its incredible strength, estimated at over 600 pounds of gripping force per tentacle, against the vulnerable divers who had placed themselves at risk to help. When they finally cut through the last strand of commercial fishing net after nearly 2 hours of painstaking work, Atlas didn't immediately swim away to safety, as every rescue manual and wildlife behavior guide would predict. Instead, the massive octopus hovered motionless in the water directly in front of Sarah, its tentacles moving in slow, graceful undulations that seemed almost like an underwater ballet. Then something happened that would haunt Sarah's dreams and inspire her research for the rest of her career. Atlas reached out with its largest primary tentacle, nearly 3 feet in circumference, and gently wrapped it around Sarah's arm, not squeezing with any of its tremendous strength, not restraining her movement, but holding her with the tenderness of a grateful handshake between old friends. The octopus maintained direct eye contact the entire time, those large, dark, intelligent eyes seeming to peer directly into Sarah's soul with an intensity that spoke of profound recognition and gratitude. Sarah felt tears forming behind her diving mask as she experienced a moment of connection that transcended species barriers, that challenged everything. Marine science thought it knew about consciousness, intelligence, and emotional capacity in cephalopod life forms. The embrace felt deliberate, meaningful, loaded with communication that needed no words. The tentacle embrace lasted nearly 40 seconds, an eternity underwater, where every moment represents precious air consumption and potential decompression complications. But none of the dive team members moved. None of them checked their gauges or worried about bottom time. They all understood they were witnessing something that might never happen again in human history. When Atlas finally released Sarah's arm with obvious reluctance, the octopus slowly backed away from the rescue team, maintaining eye contact as it moved toward the cave entrance. But instead of disappearing immediately into the vast darkness of the Pacific Ocean, Atlas stopped near the mouth of the cave, turned back toward the rescue team, and began the most extraordinary display any of them had ever witnessed in decades of marine research. Atlas's entire massive body became a living canvas of color. Brilliant electric blues flashed across its skin, followed by deep royal purples, bright golden yellows, and shimmering silvers that seemed to glow with their own internal light. The patterns cycled and shifted with mathematical precision, each color sequence building on the previous one like movements in a symphony. The display was so complex, so clearly intentional and structured that it could only be interpreted as language, as a sophisticated attempt at communication that went far beyond simple emotional expression. This was Atlas speaking in colors, telling a story, sharing thoughts and feelings in a visual language that marine science was only beginning to understand. Dr. Murphy's professional camera equipment captured every frame as Atlas performed what could only be described as an elaborate speech, a communication of gratitude, emotion, intelligence, and perhaps even friendship that left the entire dive team floating in stunned silence. The color display continued for nearly 4 minutes, Atlas's skin telling an intricate story in hues and patterns that seemed to follow grammatical rules and logical progression. Then, with one final brilliant flash of pure silver light that illuminated the entire cave chamber, Atlas turned and glided gracefully out of the cave, disappearing into the kelp forests of Monterey Bay. Back at the Monterey Bay Marine Research Station, the team spent countless hours reviewing the underwater footage, frame by frame, analyzing every color pattern, every gesture, every moment of the unprecedented interaction. The patterns Atlas had displayed were unlike anything in existing scientific literature, featuring combinations and sequences that had never been documented in any previous cephalopod research. Dr. Chen consulted with leading cephalopod experts around the world, from the Marine Biological Laboratory in Massachusetts to the University of Cambridge in England, sharing the video evidence of what appeared to be complex emotional expression and structured communication in a wild octopus species. Marine biologists, cognitive researchers, and animal behaviorists debated the implications, while neurologists studied the footage for evidence of advanced cognitive processing. The rescue video went viral within hours of being posted online. Millions of viewers around the world watched in amazement as Atlas cooperated with human rescuers, displayed apparent gratitude, and communicated through sophisticated color patterns that resembled nothing so much as an alien language. Marine biology programs at universities worldwide use the footage as evidence that intelligence and consciousness exist in forms far more diverse than previously imagined. But for Sarah, the story was far from over. The rescue had been just the beginning of something unprecedented in marine science. 3 weeks after the dramatic rescue divers exploring the Monterey Bay area began reporting sightings of a massive octopus near the Cathedral Cave system, not hiding in rocky crevices or camouflaged against the seafloor, as giant Pacific octopuses typically do, but visible in open water, almost as if it was patrolling the area, waiting for something or someone. When Sarah returned to the dive site to investigate these reports, she found Atlas exactly where the other divers had described, positioned near the cave entrance where the rescue had taken place. The octopus was resting on a rocky outcropping, but clearly alert and actively watching for approaching divers. As soon as Atlas detected Sarah's underwater lights approaching through the kelp forest, the creature's skin immediately lit up with the same complex blue and silver patterns from their final communication during the rescue. The octopus swam directly toward her with obvious recognition, stopping just a few feet away and beginning an elaborate display of colors that seemed almost like an excited conversation. Sarah documented the encounter meticulously with both video and still photography. Atlas appeared completely healthy. The severe injuries from the commercial fishing net had healed remarkably well, and the octopus moved through the water with fluid grace and obvious strength. But what struck Sarah most profoundly was the apparent intentionality of this meeting. Atlas had been waiting for her to return. Over the following months, Sarah made regular research dives to the Cathedral Cave area, and Atlas was always there, sometimes visible near the cave entrance, sometimes emerging from deeper waters when Sarah's dive lights first appeared, but always ready to interact, always displaying the same complex patterns of blue and silver that seemed to serve as a form of greeting between friends. The interactions evolved far beyond simple recognition and grew more complex. With each encounter, Atlas began bringing objects to Sarah, carefully selected gifts from the ocean floor. Small shells with perfect spiral patterns, interesting rocks with unusual colors and textures, pieces of colorful coral that seemed chosen specifically for their beauty. The octopus would present these offerings with deliberate ceremony, placing them carefully where Sarah could easily collect them, then backing away, as if waiting for approval or response. Marine psychologists and animal behaviorists studying the documented behavior noted that gift-giving in wild animals typically occurred only between mated pairs during courtship rituals or within close family groups as a form of social bonding. The fact that Atlas was consistently presenting objects to a human suggested cognitive and emotional development that challenged fundamental assumptions about cephalopod consciousness and the possibility of interspecies friendship. 6 months after the initial rescue, Sarah made a discovery that revolutionized everything she thought she knew about octopus intelligence and communication abilities. During one of their regular weekly meetings, Atlas began displaying a completely new type of pattern on its skin, but this pattern was fundamentally different from anything Sarah had seen before. Instead of the flowing organic designs that typically characterized cephalopod color displays, this new pattern was geometric angular, composed of straight lines and precise angles that looked almost like mathematical symbols or written characters. Sarah watched in absolute amazement as Atlas repeated the geometric pattern 3 times, each repetition identical to the last, with mathematical precision that suggested deliberate symbolic thinking. When Sarah attempted to sketch the pattern on her waterproof slate, Atlas moved closer, examined her drawing carefully, and then displayed the pattern again, but much slower, as if teaching a student to recognize and understand a new concept. The implications were staggering. Atlas wasn't just communicating through instinctive color displays. It was creating what appeared to be symbolic representations that could be repeated, shared, and potentially understood across species barriers. This was evidence of abstract thinking and symbolic communication that placed cephalopod intelligence in an entirely new category. Dr. Murphy, who witnessed several of these symbolic display sessions, called them the most significant development in marine cognitive science in decades. "We're not just looking at advanced animal intelligence," he told the international research community. "We're potentially looking at the emergence of true interspecies symbolic communication." The scientific community remained deeply divided. Some conservative researchers argued that Sarah and her team were anthropomorphizing natural behaviors, seeing complex patterns and intentions that didn't actually exist, while others pointed to the consistent repeatability of Atlas's symbolic displays. The clear intentionality behind the gift-giving behavior, and the obvious emotional bonds that had formed between human and cephalopod as evidence of unprecedented cognitive development. But the documented evidence continued to mount with each encounter. Atlas began creating increasingly complex underwater games using shells, rocks, and pieces of coral as playing pieces, arranging them in patterns that required problem-solving skills to understand. The octopus would demonstrate solutions to these puzzles, then wait patiently while Sarah attempted to replicate the arrangements using hand signals and gestures to guide her when she made mistakes. When Sarah successfully completed one of Atlas's underwater puzzles, the octopus would flash brilliant colors of obvious approval and excitement. When she struggled with particularly complex arrangements, Atlas would gently guide her hands with tentacle tips, showing her the correct movements with the patience of a dedicated teacher. The relationship had evolved far beyond the initial rescue and gratitude. It had become genuine friendship, mentorship, and perhaps most remarkably, education flowing in both directions, as Sarah learned about octopus intelligence and communication, while Atlas seemed to be learning about human behavior and capabilities. Sarah published her groundbreaking research on Atlas in the prestigious journal Marine Cognitive Science. The comprehensive paper, titled Interspecies Communication: Emotional Bonding and Symbolic Representation in Pacific Giant Octopus, caused an international sensation. Marine biologists, cognitive researchers, philosophers, and linguists debated the profound implications of documented friendship and communication between human and cephalopod. The research paper was dedicated to Atlas, the remarkable creature who taught the scientific community that intelligence, consciousness, and the capacity for friendship exist in forms we are only beginning to recognize, understand, and appreciate. 1 year after the dramatic rescue that started their relationship, Sarah made what she knew would be her final documented dive to meet Atlas. She found the giant octopus waiting in their usual meeting spot near the cathedral cave entrance, but something was visibly different. Atlas moved more slowly through the water. Its vibrant colors were less intense, and its interactions carried a gentler, more contemplative quality. Pacific giant octopuses typically live only 3 to 5 years. Atlas was clearly approaching the end of its natural lifespan, showing the signs of aging that marked the final chapter of its remarkable life. During their emotional final meeting, Atlas presented Sarah with the most beautiful and meaningful gift of their entire relationship: a perfectly preserved nautilus shell with intricate spiral chambers that must have required hours of careful searching to locate. The octopus placed the precious shell carefully in Sarah's hands, then performed the most elaborate and moving color display she had ever witnessed. Complex patterns flowed across Atlas's skin like living art, brilliant blues and silvers and golds, creating designs of breathtaking beauty and obvious emotional significance. It was clearly a farewell speech delivered in a language of light and color that transcended words and needed no translation to convey its deep meaning. When the magnificent display ended, Atlas gently touched Sarah's face mask one final time with the tip of its primary tentacle, then turned slowly and swam into the depths of Monterey Bay, disappearing into the blue darkness. Sarah never saw Atlas again, despite regular dives to their meeting place. But the profound impact of their unprecedented friendship continued to resonate throughout the marine biology community, and beyond the carefully documented evidence of complex emotional bonding communication and symbolic thinking between human and octopus opened entirely new fields of research into cephalopod consciousness, interspecies communication, and the nature of intelligence itself. Sarah's groundbreaking work with Atlas led to increased legal protection for octopus populations, stricter international regulations on commercial fishing practices that endangered deep-sea wildlife, and a fundamental shift in how marine science viewed the cognitive abilities of cephalopods. Most importantly, Atlas had proven beyond doubt that the ocean holds forms of intelligence and consciousness that rival and perhaps exceed our own in complexity and emotional depth. The story of Sarah and Atlas became far more than just a rescue tale. It became scientific proof that consciousness exists in forms we never imagined, that friendship can transcend the boundaries of species, and that the vast depths of the ocean hold mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about life intelligence and the possibility of communication between vastly different forms of consciousness. If this incredible story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like and share it with someone who believes that the ocean holds wonders and intelligence beyond our wildest imagination. Sometimes the most extraordinary connections happen in the deepest places, where only courage, curiosity, and an open heart can take us into the unknown. Sometimes understanding doesn't require words, it just needs the willingness to see intelligence, consciousness, and friendship in forms we never expected to find.